for coming today to hear the great Joan Jonas speak with Amorales. This conversation is part of a new series of talks graciously sponsored by Casa Dragones. Please, following the talk around 6 o'clock, join us to enjoy some of Casa Dragones' tequila, which will be sponsored just around the corner back there. And now I'd like to introduce first Joan. Joan Jonas is a world-renowned artist whose work encompasses a wide range of media, including video, performance, installation, sound, text, and sculpture. Jonas's experiments in productions in the late 1960s and early 70s continue to be crucial to the development of many contemporary art genres, from performance and video to conceptual art and theater. Since 1968, her practice has explored ways of seeing the rhythms of rituals and the authority of objects and gestures. Jonas has exhibited, screened, and performed her work at museums, galleries, and large-scale group exhibitions throughout the world, such as Documenta 5, 6, 7, 8, 11, and 13, the 28th Sao Paulo Biennale, the 5th Kochi Muzeris Biennale, and the 13th Shanghai Biennale. She has recently presented solo exhibitions at the United States Pavilion at the 56th edition of the Venice Biennale, Tate Modern London, the Soralves in Porto, Pinacoteca de Sao Paulo, Museo Thyssen-Bornemisza in Madrid, Dia Beacon, and Haus der Kunst in Munich. The Museum of Modern Art here in New York will host a retrospective of her work next year. In 2018, she was awarded the prestigious Kyoto Prize, presented to those individuals who have contributed significantly to the scientific, cultural, and spiritual betterment of mankind. Carlos Amorales and his work focus on language and the potential for communication through gestures, sounds, and symbols. Since the 1990s, Amorales has experimented at the intersection between image and sign using an array of media such as animation, drawing, film, video, installation, and performance to establish different forms of translation. Instruments become characters, letters become shapes, and narratives unfold as nonverbal actions in a world of their own making. Amorales has presented solo exhibitions at the Mexican Pavilion for the 57th Venice Biennale, at the Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam, the Philadelphia Museum of Art, Friedrichshainum in Kassel, Germany, the National Gallery of Victoria in Melbourne, Australia, and Museo Tamayo in Mexico City, where he lives and works. His work has been included in international biennials that include the 2nd and 8th Berlin Biennales, the 12th and 10th Biennale de La Habana in Cuba, and the 10th Shanghai Biennale, as well as group exhibitions at the Museum of Modern Art, Guggenheim, the Barbican Center in London, Tate Liverpool, Centre Pompidou, and the Mori Art Museum in Tokyo. So now I turn it over to Carlos and Joan. Thank you.
Thank you. Very welcome. Joan, thank you so much for being here. I want to introduce how we met, or before how we met, how I heard about Joan, or how I got acquainted to her work. And that was when I was still a student at the Rietveld in Holland, that Joan had I think it was a retrospective, from what I understood,
I did, yeah.
at the Stedelijk Museum. And I called my mother, and my mother used to be an artist, and I told her about Joan, and she said, like, go, it's a very interesting artist. So I went, and I was very, it really opened my eyes, and it was really, for me, a discovery. And there was one piece which I really liked, which is called Volcano Saga, that for me, it really made me start to think a lot about many, many things, and that we can discuss or touch a bit later, because for me it became like a seminal piece, or something I keep thinking about and I keep referring in a way. And then I had the chance to apply to the Rijksacademy, and then it was a moment where Joan was teaching there. And it was really great because, first because I got accepted, so that was a major thing for me. But then I had the chance to speak with her and in a way be her student. You made you made a seminar, and I remember very well that you started by giving us a myth, like a folk tale, I think, or a myth to read. So for me, that was also like a chance to see your working process and somewhere you lead us through that. And I don't remember what we did at the end with the seminar, but we kept meeting, and then we kept discussing work, and in a way, I've started to feel like you were advising me, and you were start to lead me how to become an artist, like really in the beginning. Like I was 25 then, 26. And then when I finished the Rax Academy, I had a, ¿cómo dirías? Temerario. Like I was brave, but I also like reckless enough to invite you to Mexico and to do a project together. I don't know, perhaps I didn't mention, but when you arrived in the airport, I was really like, then I realized, oh my God, it's Joan Jonas in Mexico. Like she came. And then, well, we collaborated. So all to say that yeah, it's been, I mean, we also, you invited us to a group of your former students to exhibit in MIT. And then we were together at Yvonne Lambert for a while, I mean, in the same gallery. So I feel you are an artist I've been kind of following. Like,
well, it's been a long, shall we say, friendship.
Yeah.
And I have to say, the Rax Academy, as opposed to every other place I've ever taught, the Rax Academy, the meetings between the artists and the participants, we didn't call them students, were 2 hours, right? Mm-hmm. And it's very, very different from when you go to, like if I go to Columbia here or whatever, you have like, they say, okay, you have 10 minutes with each student, or 20 minutes at the most. So to have 2 hours is it's a big difference, and it really makes, it's the way everything should be, because you actually sit down and you have to go through something and understand each other in a very different way, and also to get to the bottom of things with the work. Mm-hmm. And yeah, so that was the way we met also with that.
So that meant there were very long conversations. Yeah. And also it was a moment where, for me, it was a big change, or I was discovering something new in my work. Like I was challenging, but I have learned till then. I arrived there more like a painter, I would say.
When did you begin the project with the wrestlers?
I began the project with the wrestlers at the Rijks. No, at the same time.
Oh, at the same time.
At the same time. And that was a project I did where I wanted to create a fictional identity for myself. And what I thought was to commission a mask to a mask maker of wrestling mask in Mexico, and just appear myself there, and then I asked for a portrait. And then I got this mask, and I called the mask Amorales. And that also was like an important thing to do, because I changed my name. So my real name is Carlos Aguirre Morales, so then I took the A from my father and put it together with my moral mother's name, and then it became like Amorales. So I called the character, this mask, Amorales. And that was the beginning.
Yeah. But, I mean, talk a little bit about the time and the context about you actually doing a piece about Mexico. I mean, I was very interested in that because it was a time when, well, people were saying we're going to have a show of Mexican artists. Mm-hmm. And Carlos, thank goodness, he didn't want to be called, he didn't want to be put in that box. And so, I don't know what that has to do with anything, but that was the atmosphere then, and the time was, it was after, you mentioned Magicians of the Earth in your book.
Yeah.
A big show that was done by Pancho. Who did that show? Who did the Magicians of the Earth?
Martin, no?
Yes.
Martin, oui. I mean, it was one of the first shows to acknowledge artists, like non-Western artists, but at the same time calling them magicians. It was a bit like an ambiguity, because in a way, many amazing artists like Alfredo Yar, who was here, or like participated there, like doing very highly conceptual works. But in the other hand, it was kind of called them. They were like accepted through becoming magicians in a way. And there was a big discussion at the moment, I think. I mean, I arrived in Europe in the 90s. I was 20. And I think it still was the moment where you had like German art or British painting or French new figuration. Like, it was this kind of nationalism in arts and in Europe, basically, I think. And, well, like perhaps you had also American art, but I remember having these big kind of labels. And talking with teachers in Holland, they would even doubt that there was art happening in Mexico. You know, they wouldn't consider it like,
Really?
like art.
Oh my
Yeah.
God. Who were they?
I don't remember their names.
Call them up.
But there was this big question. And I mean, my parents are both artists, so I was like, yeah, you know, like they exist, you know, I'm sure. So yeah, and it became really a question how to, I thought,
Well, for me, it was
it's not just an opposition, I would say.
that first piece was, we don't have to dwell on that, but that first piece about the wrestlers, for me, was sort of right up my alley. I thought it was a wonderful, really fantastic work, and the way you right away started using masks. And,
Well, that piece allowed me to do two things, like to look Mexican, and in the other hand, act, let's say, in a more conceptual way. So I could really play with that. So for me, that was like an interesting and important step.
Can I read something from this book?
Sure.
These books, I guess they must be over there as well. But the tool I came up to work with as a starting point was a mask, a veil, a screen, or a cape, situated in the liminal space between the inside and the outside, like in theater, between fiction and reality. A mask is like a portable theater that enabled me to wear my own artwork out into the world, as opposed to being limited to the studio, projecting an image on a blank canvas. The mask enabled me to introduce my practice into the realm of performance and to take distance from the self-absorbed problems of painting. I named the mask Amorales. The word is a mix of my mother's and father's last name. I mean, I think that's a very clear, that's by Carlos, he wrote that, of course, a clear explanation. And
yes. And you mentioned something that still interests me, and I think was very important then, was that space in between.
Well, I like the way, in this book in general, you put the work, the concept into a space. And I mean, I never heard you say that, inside and outside. Maybe you can talk a little bit about inside and outside. What do you mean by that?
Once I did the mask, I found a suit for the whole character, so I could wear it. And I did a series of portraits, which are called inside versus outside. So basically, it's me using the costume and then turning the costume upside down, like when you turn a socket, no? Like, so it was like the inside of the costume against the outside of the costume. And to me, it was a nice way to signalize exactly that space in between, no? It's neither in nor outside. And for me, it's like a limen, it's a liminal. So that's, for instance, an example. But I think it's a lot there, because it's like, for instance, in this show, working with musicians, but not being a musician. So you have to find a space where you can communicate. You know, like, you need to convince, but you need to bring them also in what you're doing. So you have to build a sort of space, like an in-between space.
Yeah, I mean, you speak a lot about that space between the audience and the piece, and the artist and the work itself. And you use the word interstices.
Mm-hmm.
You use the word. Now I have to look it up.
Interference.
Yeah.
Yeah, interference. No, that's not interference. It's intestines.
Somebody.
Yeah, it's like it will come back.
Yeah, the interface. Actually.
Interface,
Yeah.
interface.
Sorry.
So instead of calling it mask, was like interface, which was a word I read in the context of internet, which was starting in the 90s also. So it was really like they were talking about these tools where you could connect to the virtual world or to this other space that, let's say, was inside of the computer or in that other space. And I thought it was interesting, as I was interested in this space between fantasy and reality, I needed to find a tool. I needed to find, and when you put a mask, that's exactly the case. You know, like, the first thing is that you're wearing it, so you can have it in reality. So if I will have it here, I will just be able to put it, and then be able to be in that other space, and at the same time put you in that other space, in this kind of fantasy.
And you actually had a guy, I mean, maybe you mentioned it, you had a guy who was your alter ego, who dressed like you and became you.
Yes, because what I realized having the mask and having the suit and the name is that something interesting was not to wear it myself, because how do I represent myself anyway, as in an empty way? But I could lend the identity to somebody else. So I did that. I lent it to a colleague who was a writer, and then he became an artist.
Didn't he sort of like totally inhabit you?
He did.
No, he totally entered into the role and then wanted to stay there, right?
Well, it was a very strange situation, because we started to do performances where I will become the documentalist. I will film him, and he will put the mask, and he will interact. Like, for instance, he will be me now. So he will be giving the lecture, and I will be filming him. So nobody knew us. So he will have the mask, so people will start to think the artist was him. But the artist was me, which was like behind. And that started to create like a very interesting confusion. So we started to be known and, becoming known in Holland and famous.
I think a lot of artists, I mean, I don't know, I've had this fantasy of changing my name and, putting on a different wig and doing different work, and would people accept it if I became someone else, another name? I think it's an interesting problem.
I think it's an important fantasy to have. Yeah. I mean, when I left Mexico, I had the chance to do that, because when you are a foreigner and nobody knows you, you have the ability or the chance, the opportunity to just be somebody else. And I remember when I left having this very powerful feeling of, okay, I can invent myself.
I mean, I think that artists sometimes have to become someone else in order to do their work. I mean, in order to reprogram your mind, say that, or reprogram your aesthetic or something. That I had the same thing. I didn't want to be Joan Jonas. I don't want to talk about myself too much, but I wore masks. No. And my mask was to hide my face and to hide my identity. And also I was nervous about appearing in public. I don't know if you were at all.
I'm still there.
Yes.
But it's true, and we spoke a lot about organic honey.
Yeah.
And I remember interviewing you many times or asking you, how was that experience? And that's something I could connect, because I was seeing work of you in books, and then I would see the face of organic honey. And I was like, it reminds me of my own mask. But once I went to visit a gallerist, Fons Welters from Holland. And we had a nice talk in his office, and he said to me, you should see a film which is called Onibaba, which is about somebody who puts a mask and she cannot take it anymore. And I was like, what does he mean? Like, what is this about? And then I realized that I became known as an artist, as the artist with the wrestling mask. And in a point, I did it for 7 years. And for 7 years made sense, or at least for 6 years made sense. But in a point, I started to want to do something else, to develop into other
Were
directions.
you in Amsterdam that whole time? I mean, in Holland?
Yeah,
The
yeah.
whole 7 years.
I mean, the last years I was more traveling.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And also the Amorales mask went to Pompidou, and then it went to the Tate, and exploded. But I thought I cannot just go on doing this forever.
No.
And then I tried to push the mask away, and it was difficult.
It's all, yeah. That's
And then
hard.
I understood what.
Yeah.
And that's what I like of masks, that they seem to be toys, but they're much more serious. Like they have another power, I think.
Yeah. So you brought the book up to the table.
Yes.
And the book was on display in a vitrine.
This is the book which was shown in the vitrine. And I thought perhaps I can show you.
Hold the mic.
Okay.
And you talk.
Okay.
Show the book.
So this book, hello? No, I can't. This book is, I made it because I wanted to learn how to lead a choir, but I'm not a musician, so I don't know musical language. And also, it was not a professional choir, so it was amateur choir, so I had to convince them. It's not like you just pay them and they do whatever you want, but I had to lead them and charm them and make them take me serious. So to prepare myself, I went to see last year a choir festival. So I had the chance to see, 15 choirs, one after each other. And something very beautiful was not only to hear them, but to focus on the director or the conductor and see their style. So I noticed that some of them were almost like karate, like they were very martial, very strict. Others were very soft. Some were very imposing. Some were, were very light. But there was one woman which I really liked what she was doing, which was that I felt she was like sculpting on air, as the singers were singing and she was directing them. She started to make these really beautiful movements. And it could have been like drawing on air or sculpting air. And that gave me the feeling of the materiality of the voice, like the voice is something invisible, is not there, but it's completely there. It's like completely takes you and also goes inside you. So I was really like, okay, this is really what I like, or what interests me of being here working with choirs. And I thought, well, each one of these conductors has its own particularity, its own strength, its own style. As I said, like maybe being strong or being soft. And I started to question what was my strength. And I thought, well, my strength is not music, but my strength is drawing. I draw a lot, so I like to draw. So that's something I've been doing for years. So I started to draw, imagining I was conducting a choir, or these movements could be directions for a choir. And slowly I started to make this. Start to become like movement. A movement that will dissolve into something else. It's okay if I don't speak. Yes, thank you. And then the labyrinth start to take shapes, start to become more like a road, and then start to mix with other symbols or become more organic. And then I start to organize it in different ways and try different ways to draw it. Or it became a face. And then became really like directions, how to move or where to direct something, like maybe the voice, the song, or where I would stand as a conductor, towards the choir, how to number things. And I just went on, and then I started to put my hand, so I started to mark my hand, and that became something like I started to repeat and repeat. And I thought, okay, with my hand, maybe I can be like switching off, switching on, pointing at the different voices in the choir. The waves, you know, the sound waves or the volume.
How long have you been working on this book?
I worked on it for 4 months. Or
A month?
4, like 3-4 months.
Oh, 3 or 4 months.
Actually, I'm still working on it. The thing is, I just went on and on and on. But in between all this, also some of the images that later became part of the show started to appear here. So in a way, it became really important to make this book because it really allowed me to eventually make these pieces or make an exhibition here with you. So I just wanted to take the chance to show you fastly because it's put in a vitrine.
Yeah, it's too bad we can't all.
And we cannot really look at it.
Per-
But I wanted to give you a bit the sense of what is here.
And the dots, Carlos, what are the dots? The little, all through your work now, and it's over there.
I don't really know. I mean,
They look
it
like
felt something
stigmata in that.
in that,
looks like
yeah,
stigmata.
yeah. And there it also looks like eyes, and then I make a mask with my hands. But in those drawings, they become more like points, like really like maybe rhythms. So it become like the notes, maybe for clapping, for instance, or for
What made you make
percussion.
these profile images of?
I wanted to represent the choir, so I
The
thought
choir.
it's like different people singing, like a bunch of them. But they also look like they could be, one could be a choir, but all together they can also become a choir. And but they also could be like movement.
And so the choir, I'm sorry, maybe you said, I'm having a hard time hearing. The choir, you did a piece with a choir in
I did
Mexico.
no, I did it in Holland, but
in
more
Holland.
recently. Yeah, yeah. I was invited to do a piece with a choir, well, or I invited myself, or I developed, but I ended up conducting a choir.
I mean, for me, I have to say I do love Mexico. But it's a very, that somebody could say there's no art. Well, they meant there's no contemporary art. Is that what they meant?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well, that was a long time ago. But it has such a rich generations. I mean, pre-Columbian, and then Diego Rivera, and then the present. It has
Yeah.
layers of practice. That, how does that affect you? I mean, that must be a little overwhelming. I mean, we have also history here, but it's very special in Mexico. It's a different, and also South America.
Well, it's
Central
very
America.
special, I think, because of the connection with the pre-Hispanic world. So that's something that is really deep there, and it's a very powerful kind of art. How does it affect you? I mean, I left Mexico
maybe
for
that's a
10 years.
Stupid question.
No, no, no.
I mean, when I go to Mexico, and Carlos invited me we've spent time in Mexico also, which I really appreciate. Every once in a while you make a friend with one of your students, and which is wonderful, actually, I have to say. And so Carlos invited me to come down there and to do this project with the children.
Mm-hmm.
We could talk about that a little bit. I don't remember exactly, you remember better than I do, but the children that we worked with had never been as viewers any place in Mexico City, really. They've only been to places to beg.
Yeah.
So that was great.
I mean, we were working with street kids, and a bit the idea was to invite contemporary artists like Joan to meet them and develop together some kind of strategies, like perhaps from performance art or conceptual art, that could become valuable for the kids for their own survival. That was a bit my thesis. So I invited her, and what ended up becoming was we organized a tour with them where we all disguised like tourists. And since these kids normally they beg on the streets or they're just in the street. In the moment we became like American tourists, and we were in shorts and we were like completely with sunglasses.
Right, yeah.
And then we took this bus and we went through all these places where tourists go. They started to see things in a different way, and we did it for some days, sorry. And it was super interesting. And it came to a point where they met other street kids, and they were photographing them. So it really became like a nice, I would say like a distancing device or something. And in that way, we also spent some time walking through the streets, seeing places, or
I know, Carlos was
talking.
afraid I was going to get kidnapped. Yeah. And also, at that time in Mexico, and I can't remember what else I was doing. I went several times, and at one point I was in somebody's office, the Mexican, in Mexico City, and they said to me, "I wish you had black hair," because they were afraid I was going to get kidnapped. You know?
Well, yeah, you have been there 4 times, I think, or.
About maybe at least, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And you also did a performance there,
I did.
and you film a performance.
It's weird, but it was.
You film in the Espacio Escultórico.
Oh yeah, well,
with
Carlos,
the
I was working on a
pyramids.
piece about Dante, called Reading Dante, and I asked Carlos to find me a site in Mexico City on one of those trips, and that was a fantastic site. He took me to this place. It's a volcanic ruin, right? Outside, a little bit outside of the center.
It's in the university,
Yeah,
in
in
the
the
park of the university.
And at that time, Carlos's wife at that time, Galia, performed in it. And this ruin, artists had been commissioned to make these cement plaques around it. It was an amazing place.
It's in the volcanic part of the city, and it's a huge circle. It's like maybe 100 meters diameter, and they just took off all the plants from the rocks, and they encircle it, and then they build these pyramids, not like Aztec pyramids, but more almost like Egyptian pyramids around, like triangles. And it's very mystical. It has a very strong, beautiful.
Yeah, I did quite a bit of filming there. It was great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Carlos.
No, you're welcome. What else?
I was just, yeah. I mean, I could read a little bit more, but what else do you have there?
Yeah, I mean, I have some things I wanted to ask you about. I wanted to ask you about technology and using technology in your work. I remember talking with you about the first time you got a video camera.
Oh, the Portapack.
And, well, what that became and how this has evolved. No,
I mean, did you have Portapacks in Mexico City before that?
I don't know.
No, you don't.
No,
No,
maybe
no.
perhaps, yeah, we had what was her name? Polidori? There is this video artist from the 70s from Mexico. She
Anyway,
also did many things in Holland. You don't remember? Okay. But yeah, we had a few video artists, but not many. Where did you got your first camera?
1970, I think. Or maybe 68. I went to Japan.
In Japan.
But, well, for me, travel has always been a large part of my inspiration in my work. Traveling to places like Japan or Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I've been to Vietnam and so on and so forth. So I'm one of those people that is inspired by the far away.
Mm-hmm.
Any place but home I find interesting. No, I like home too. But Mexico is it's so close to us.
Mm.
And I mean, maybe you didn't want to talk about Mexico, but
It's okay.
But it's such a special place
Mm-hmm.
in many ways. And anyway, so I first got a Portapack. I went to Japan and artists in New York. Many of you are very young, and the first video cameras were a revelation for us, for artists, to be able to see yourself and to make films yourself in your house without going to a studio. But you started doing that right away when you were in.
When I was finally at the Rax Academy, I had the chance to borrow the cameras and the tripods. It was really like the first thing you start to think of was to film yourself. So yeah, and also at the time it was the work of Matthew Barney being shown at the Boymans.
What?
Matthew Barney.
Matthew Barney.
At the Boymans, and it was also then it was super important to see.
I just saw his work yesterday.
Yes, he told me.
You haven't seen it?
No,
I don't know
unfortunately.
if this is the last week, but it's quite amazing.
Yeah.
It is, I have to say.
And then it was also very amazing.
Yeah.
So that was also very interesting as an artist, to think how you put yourself in the camera. And then, of course, was your work, or was Bruce Nauman, or Vito Conchi. And so it was this
Any women?
idea. You? And there was this idea of the artist placing itself, or herself, or himself in front of the camera.
And you were very inspired by two people you mentioned to me, Matt
Mullican.
and the other one was, anyway, one of them was Matt.
Matt was one, and Dan Graham was the
And
other
Dan
one,
Graham,
which
but
I also
Matt
had a chance to
is-
speak with.
Well, what I find interesting about Matt's work, for instance, is his paintings are these hard-edged geometric forms with bright primary colors, and then his performances are just totally undermining that sense of order, because he hypnotizes. He has himself hypnotized. And is that what made you interested in him, or what
I
was
saw
it
that
about-
piece. I saw the Under Hypnosis piece.
So he doesn't
and-
have control, seemingly, on his body or his, I just saw, he just recently did, I think he's taking more control in that situation, but I find it very interesting that an artist would put himself in that position and vulnerability.
But also, I found very interesting that he wanted to be in the artwork, or to inhabit the painting. There is a film, one of the last films from Kurosawa. It's called Dreams, where the character is a Japanese tourist, and he's in Holland in the tulip fields, and it's a painting by Van Gogh, and he jumps into it and he walks in the painting. It's like it's almost naive in a way how it's done.
Well, I mean,
But
one
this
the
idea
early-
of going into your work, like entering the work, I thought was super interesting.
early French filmmaking. What's the name of the one where she goes into the mirror? I'm a little bit, what? Yeah. Anyway, so artists have been doing that for a long time, to try to enter their own fantasy world
I think so.
somehow. And but is that what interested you about him? Is that he?
It interests me, his physical tryout.
I mean,
Like
you
he was
did.
really doing it literally through hypnosis, and seeing him in the floor, and he just marked the space with tape, and then he was coming in and getting out, and I thought, wow, this is super strong. I saw that in Brussels. I saw it was a video. I didn't saw it live. And I was trying to do that with the mask. I wanted the mask to allow me to enter that other space. Or I just, instead of going into my fantasy world, I just tried to go to reality. I just took the wrong.
I mean, that was a very interesting piece. We keep bringing it up, but where is that piece now? Did somebody? Is it in some institution?
I gave it to the
Oh,
Stedelijk.
good.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, I liked it. I happen to be, as I said before, I'm one of those people who likes the exotic and foreign. But what I really liked about that was knowing more about these characters, the wrestlers, who all create their own fantasy characters, right? So you're a character of a character of a character. It's kind of like a mirror echoing effect. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So
I mean, what is nice with wrestlers is that they are in reality and in fantasy at the same time. So when you go to the arena to see them perform, they arrive in their car with a mask. So, they do these very banal things at the same time, and then they appear in the wrestling, in the ring, and then it's just a spectacle. But you know, I like this that they are in different parts, in different stages or moments. I also like that the mask is like a portable fantasy device. You know, it's something, in the moment you put it, you're there, no?
But now, I mean, I've noticed there was, like, in many cases, a big shift in your work. And I remember one being that butterfly piece. And there's a beautiful thing in here. It was inspired, I don't know if I should read it, but it's a little longer. Where is it? When you went to see your grandmother, and she was old, and you took your children, and you saw a butterfly there? Or you
No,
saw,
I just imagined.
You
I was
imagined.
trying to sleep.
So then you made a piece with how many thousands?
The first version was
You
5,000.
made them.
Yeah,
In your studio,
we
you
caught
made
them.
5,000 butterflies out of paper.
The
And,
first version, yeah.
Attached them to the walls. It's quite amazing.
And then
I
it
think
has grown.
Yeah, I think you did that. You repeated that technique or way. Like here, there are all these multiples of an image.
I tend to do that. I tend to repeat and repeat and repeat, and I get a lot of pleasure in it.
I know, and these are amazing because they're hand done. I mean, when I came in here and I saw these, I couldn't imagine how they were done. But they're done with a stencil, which is technically quite impressive, right? There.
Yeah, thank you. But
But why? Why?
it's really, I mentioned pleasure, and I think it has to do with pleasure. It has to do with repetition, and becomes like inertia, and it becomes, and I start to discover something every time, and it's never the same. It's like the same procedure, but then something happens differently. And it can become boring, but in a moment also, you know, like you can change it completely, like adding color, no? Or combining the colors, like risking a bit, like.
Well, it's very musical, especially over there. That looks like music.
Exactly.
Those drawings look like a
It's,
musical score.
it's the same, no? That's also
Yeah.
repetition, a repetition. And you asked me about the dots, and the dots also allow you that.
But you're using very simple technology.
Yes, in a
In
way.
all of these videos, you're using an iPhone somehow. I'm not sure how.
Here.
But, yeah.
It just becomes a screen, so what is underneath can show through. And the same way you discovered the video camera, then I think I discovered, well, like many people in the world discovered Zoom.
Which
And
ones are Zoom? Are they all?
the ones you see like a transparency and something appearing through. No, I use Zoom for all of them.
You did?
Yeah.
But how did
Just
you
in
use
Zoom,
Zoom?
you can press a button and it has this chroma key effect, or you can replace your background, for instance. And we were all using Zoom for like 2 years or 3 years, or perhaps still using it. And in the middle of the pandemic, I just started to use Zoom, but without communicating to somebody else. And then I start to film myself. And what I like is that it's almost like being in the mirror. Like you start to see yourself mirroring. Because that's the strange thing with Zoom, that you are talking to somebody, and then you're looking at how you are talking with somebody, and then you start to look a bit, you know, like, and it's so self-conscious. And I thought, and filming myself, in a way, something similar
Well, I
happened.
think it's interesting because it's a little bit, it's using a little more the technology of now with how we used to. Also, everybody was filming themselves, of course, but in a very, very different way.
Yeah.
And also, what I think is, I like about these, they look very simple in a technological sense. They're not, you can do it all in your home.
It became like that. So it's something I could do in my studio, I could do alone, I could just film myself. And then I also choose these old monitors, you know, these cubes that at least I was using in the Rax Academy then, because they look from another time. And it's also the format, you know, it's this 3x4 format. Because nowadays screens tend to be more like landscape. And here, you know, they're they're cut, and they're different because they allow more high, the image to be higher. And when I put the telephone inside, also, it's this new format, it's the telephone is a contemporary format. And then I thought, okay, the telephone is also like the book. So there are all these formats through the exhibition. That's also why I use the long banners, no? I think part of making the exhibition was really thinking what is the right or the interesting format to make the work.
Well, the Zoom is not over yet.
No, unfortunately.
It's with us for a long time. We're still doing Zooms, right?
Yeah, starting.
A friend of mine, Joan Jonas, made a whole piece using the Zoom. Only she had a different director, and she had several locations. And it's the only thing I've seen, aside from this, done with Zoom. And I don't think anybody else has done that yet. Maybe they have. I haven't seen them, but.
I think there was a point in the pandemic where everybody tried to do some artwork in Zoom. It just failed. But I had to think, because I removed myself from my work after the mask. So when I stopped the mask, I stopped also being a character or a persona.
But do you ever now, do you deal with your persona now?
If I deal with...
I mean, do you work the way you used to? I mean, for me, for instance, like, I don't do it every time, but in order to do a new piece, I used to, and I should again.
Mm-hmm.
Who am I, and who could I be, and what role could I play? That helps me to step into it and to make that transition. But do you ever go back into that mode of...
Recently, yes, because, I stopped for many years. I removed myself. I started to do animation. I started to do other things. I started to work with actors. I started to, and some years ago, like 2-3 years ago, I started to wonder if it would be interesting to reappear and to bring myself again in the work, and how. And I bought this mask, and I put it, and my beard came all around, and I was like, wow, like it looks like a wolf in a way, but also it became white. And then I was like, wow, it's been 25 years in between. So it's not the same being 25, appearing there and trying to make an art piece, but what is when you are 50 or over 50, like, what is that? And I'm still searching, but I, for instance, in this show, I decided to put myself there without a mask, and one with I cover myself, but the other one, is there 2 videos to the right, the ones over there, but to allow myself to enter the art piece, and show it, is something new in that sense, or something that I haven't done for a long, long time.
And this man over here, who's the percussionist.
Mm-hmm. His name is Diego Espinosa.
Yeah.
And he's a Mexican percussionist.
Yeah.
Very good. I mean, we don't hear him now, but this piece is made in relation to that piece. And here I commissioned a song. I wrote a poem, and then I asked the singer to compose a song with those words. So she was like elongating the words, and as long as she could. And then we started to weave, let's say, other words. And it became really like, to me, it's a bit like, sounds like Baroque music, or like this kind of, almost like church music could be. Then it's mixed. And it became very ethereal, kind of. And I thought, well, I need a counterpoint. So I thought it would be very interesting to have like a breakbeat or something like completely different to this sound. So I asked Diego to try to do, it's called like a drum and bass kind of beat, like a dance beat, like something that's really like super fast. And he came with this. But also what is interesting for me is that both are done with music that is produced with the body. So there is no instrument, or the body is the instrument. And yeah, basically, it's what they're doing. And she's called Sarmen Almond. She's a singer from Mexico.
So in the book, in this book that I have, one of the books of Carlos's, he has many axioms for action, calls them. And it reminds me of certain other artists who have written manifestos. I just want to read one as an example. A new artwork is completed which operates exclusively at the membrane between the art object and its public context, situated between inside and outside, similar to the way a mask works. At a performance level, it means that the interface operates on the interface. What does that mean?
It's one of the last ones, so it feels very complicated. But for instance, what I did for that one, especially, I was invited to an exhibition in Casa del Lago, which is like a cultural center in Mexico. And what I gave them was an illegible typeface. So it was a typeface I did, and I used for many things. So it's basically like illegible, like you cannot really read it. And my proposal was that they will turn all the text of the institution illegible. And that we did for 3 months. So it was not all the time, but it was like 3 weeks that nothing was legible. But we turned the toilets, we turned the garbage, we turned the curatorial text, we turned the name of other artists, everything. And it was really interesting, and it didn't collapse. You know, it just went like, and I was every Sunday going there. So it was very interesting because it was like showing my work neither inside, neither outside. So it was not part of the show, but was also not external to the show. So it's that exact, for me, that's that exact space, no?
I think it's very hard for artists to think about how the audience perceives the work and experiences it. And, you know, we don't know what the audience thinks or feels unless they say.
Then I learned what they, because a lot of people are like, oh, this idiot, you know, like oh, we hate contemporary art. And some people are like, wow, it's fantastic. But other people are just making lines without knowing what for, and then just arriving to the place and like, so what's the film about? Like, that's amazing. That's amazing. But I think art can subvert a lot of things. I mean, I like art that plays with reality, and I think that's what in a way what we aim, no, to play with it, to subvert it, to change it, to allow some distance.
I think you're a very good writer, Carlos.
Thank you. I was afraid.
No, because
Joan is going to read my text. My God.
I mean, you've written. This is a mask plays the flute.
Uh-huh.
So you're a poet too.
Thank you.
I just Black Cloud. Aftermath.
That's the story of the
learn
moths.
to fuck
and the
yourself.
cloud.
The I Me Not.
The I Me Not, yeah.
The man who did all that was forbidden. That sounds like a title of a Hitchcock film.
Yeah.
The man that did all that was
Or
forbidden.
Kurosawa.
Amazing, Carlos. But I think you must spend a lot of time writing, because this.
I do. If I don't draw, I write.
Record the process of constructing the character Amorales, starting with the preparations for the first trip on which the artist used the camera as a mask and photographed the places and people of his private life.
Yeah, that's when I went to I was in Holland living there, and then I traveled to Mexico searching for a mask maker, which I thought they would exist, but I was not sure. So I approached a wrestling company and I asked them, well, who does masks? And they introduced me to one.
No, I brought up Magicians of the Earth because at the time of that show, there was this, it was just us here in the United States and Europe, and then there was the rest of the world. And the Magicians of the Earth brought many other cultures into the dialogue, which should have been there already, but and there was a big shift because at that time, curators were having shows of Mexican artists, and they were putting people from one country all. Remember that time? Mm-hmm. And then it went on from there, but it wasn't. It became inappropriate and also not really interesting to work that way with artists, and artists didn't want to be. Then there was a shift to a kind of, pardon the expression, global situation.
I have to say that it was also a vehicle.
Right.
Like these national exhibitions, they also became like a vehicle for us to enter, let's say, the international field. Like, for instance, there was this show in PS1 that Klaus Wiesenbach curated with Mexican artists. It was interesting, like as generation, it was really interesting to step in it and perform there. So I have to say that we have a complex relation, like everybody.
It was a beautiful show, the Magicians of the Earth. It was a beautiful show.
I haven't seen it.
Oh, you didn't see it?
No, I was too young.
Well, anyway, it's okay, but it was a beautiful, there were incredible work in it, but it was definitely, a separation, but the beginning of a not separation. Mm-hmm. And many of the artists, some of the artists I talked to, one of them was the Rijks Academy. Were you there when there was a young artist from Africa? You remember him? I mean, the way they were selected was also kind of strange.
Was Meshach Gaba?
Yeah, I think so.
Probably,
but,
yeah.
Anyway, that's another issue. But
well, I think the world has become much more international. And it's interesting to be, for instance, in Kurimanzutto Gallery in New York, which is not the first Mexican gallery to open in New York, but it's the most international one.
I can't remember who said that for American, it was a writer, very well known, I can't remember who, saying reading like Chinese literature, you learn about another culture. And so that's what one of the functions of art is that we learn about the way other people think, other cultures. It's not at all about looking down or up. And then if it's colonialism, and there is that question for sure of taking things from other cultures and so on. That's another issue, I think. And also, it has to be given credit, but sometimes not. But it's just, I see culture is like cooking, The ingredients come together and make something else. And so it's very important that nothing is censored and that we learn about each other through reading a Chinese book, or like an Icelandic novel, learn all about Iceland and what it was like then. Do you see what I mean? So it's a process.
I mean, also in the case of this text, in the institution, to me it was almost like making something where people could become foreigners. So it's like arriving to a country where you don't understand anything, and then you start to read the context, and you start to think, well, this might be the toilet, and you're not sure, but you start to use your intelligence in another way to discover. So it's like that, yeah. And that foreignness is what allows you to learn and to think, Joan, thank you so much.